be a good Christian parent? And does it involve spanking? Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from baremarriage.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your sex life and your marriage. And today we're talking about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your sex life, marriage, and your parenting. So I am joined today by my husband, Keith.
Hey, everybody.
Who's a pediatrician.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm excited about this conversation because we have two of my online internet friends who I've known for a couple of years have just written a new book, which is out in just a couple of weeks, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, where they're looking at some of the really bad advice that was given to Christian parents and how that impacted us long term. So great conversation coming. Before we get to that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who got our course, The Whole Story. We had our special annual sale last week. So we do have a puberty course. It's video-based online so that parents can talk to their kids about puberty and sex. It's a super fun course. And yeah, I've just been having fun getting some feedback on that. So remember that we have it, because I'm constantly getting emails saying, Sheila, how do I talk to my kids about puberty? And I'm like, we have a course. So I don't think everyone always remembers. So there you go. There's your reminder when you need it. And when you buy it, you have lifetime access. So you can use it with multiple kids whenever. It'll always be there. And a special thank you to those of you who support what we do, who give money through our patron group. And as patrons, they're going to get special podcasts at the end of this one, so they get to listen to an even longer version of this conversation, or who give money to our nonprofit through the Good Fruit Faith Initiative. And they have helped us create some new videos, which are up on our YouTube channel, just explaining some basic concepts about why it's bad to talk to teen girls about modesty, what women mean when they say they need a spiritual leader, why complementarianism doesn't work, and all kinds of different things. So you can check that out on our YouTube channel. And now, babe, should we get to it?
Absolutely.
All right, here we go with our interview. Well, I am so excited about this book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, and having Marissa Burt back on the podcast. And
delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yes, Kelsey, Kramer, McGinnis. This is awesome. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you so much. It's so great to meet you virtually and talk with you about this project that is so related to your work. So I am so excited to talk to you about it.
It's kind of like the Great Sex Rescue, but for parenting in a lot of ways, which I love because it means I don't have to write it. So that's always good when someone else does it. And I know, Marissa, you were on the podcast, must be a year ago, talking about The Excellent Wife.
Yeah.
Maybe not that long. I don't know. It was a while ago anyway.
Yeah, it was last summer, I think. Yeah, it was great. Great to, but so much overlap, right? Because family life teaching is this big, it's all tied together.
Yeah. So Marissa, I think I met you first on social media, I think. Mm-hmm. And I started noticing this woman who keeps talking about all of the problems with the Christian parenting resources in the same way that we did of the marriage and sex resources. So how did the idea for this book come about?
Yeah, very organically. But social media was a big factor in it. We both, and I'm sure Kelsey will add her story of where we met up until where we met. We both had been thinking through this idea for a variety of reasons. I had been thinking of it. I'm married to a pastor, so I'd been in church communities for a couple decades. So seeing family life teaching, seeing the fruit, had explored some of these themes in a novel I wrote set in the stay-at-home daughter movement. So was really interested to kind of analyze and get in there and say, what have people been taught and how have these teachings directly and indirectly enabled harm? Because I had seen some of the fruit. I was kind of curious to look at the teaching. And one day on Twitter, back when it was still Twitter, someone had asked if you could, if you had all the time in the world, what's a book you would write? And I kind of floated the idea out for this book. I might have even said kind of like The Great Sex Rescue for Parenting or something like that. And the response was immediate.
I think I'm pretty sure I was in the comments on that.
Probably, yeah. So many people. I would buy that. We need that. And the more we began engaging in those comments, I thought, how is this book not out there yet? How have we not revisited? And I think some of it is because you rarely go back and reread parenting teaching once you've moved past it. But certainly as a number of people become parents themselves, they reflect back on their own experiences and kind of think critically about it. So that was the beginning. And then Kelsey reached out, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw this post and at this point, I was writing primarily about music and culture for Christianity Today. I'm also an adjunct professor here in Des Moines, and parenting is not my, not my area of expertise. I'm not a child development specialist or anything, but I was raised what I would call normie evangelical, and would still call myself an evangelical in many ways. But a few years prior, when my first, who's now almost 8, was a toddler, I found myself having to look for parenting resources for the first time and started just keeping some like running documents and notes, because as I started visiting some of the resources that my parents recommended, I was I was just confused because I did not see all my whole childhood in them. I was disturbed by some of them. So this is like Ted Tripp's Shepherding a Child's Heart, some older Dobson, and I just found it so out of step with anything else kind of in the mainstream I was seeing about parenting. And I did not see any Christian parenting resources that did kind of align with some of the ideas about child development in the mainstream. And so I found myself just looking who is the person who's talking about this? And there was really nothing. Um, and I just kind of kept that to myself for years. I'm not the person to write about this. This isn't my area. And then when Marissa's message or her tweet popped up, I just thought, I'm going to message this person and say, here, I have all this random stuff. This is not what I do. But if you'd ever like a conversation partner, here's what I've been thinking through. And so we just started going back and forth and developed the idea for the book.
I love it. I love it. One of the things you said early in the book, and I'll just quote it. You said, we do think that it is high time to hold the teachers, pastors, writers, influencers, and self-platformed Christian parenting experts accountable for propagating some sweeping myths about parenthood and, in some cases, about Christian faith itself. And that's what I want to talk about in this podcast. That's kind of like the big picture thing of where I want to go is how what did they do? What did they do to our ideas of faith? What did they do to our ideas of parenting? Of what did they do to our ideas of what is the essence of childhood? And how can we hold them accountable? But the Christian parenting industry, I don't know which one of you wants to jump in. Kelsey, do you want to jump in first? Or how did it begin?
Well, so I'll say in the book, we put the beginning, at least our beginning, at James Dobson's Dare to Discipline in 1970. So this is a timely conversation. I'm not sure when this is going up, but the week we're recording this, James Dobson died last week. And we put the beginning of the Christian parenting book market in 1970 because James Dobson proved basically that there was a market for Christian parenting resources marketed specifically to conservative American evangelicals who were motivated by culture war issues, we could say. And it is not that there hadn't been Christian parenting books before. We talk about some of those in our book. But James Dobson's was a runaway bestseller and ushered in an era of family resources that was unprecedented and novel in many ways. I mean, Focus on the Family was a media empire that I think now we forget how huge it was in the context that it was in the 80s and 90s, especially. And so James Dobson is not the only character. He is certainly a main character, but he sort of helped show how profitable this stuff could be and how many parents were hungry for information about how to parent the right Christian way. And he proved that it was very easy to market material if you told parents, here, let me tell you how to parent the correct Christian way. That was a good way to sell resources. He did similar things when it came to selling media for children, right? Like, here is media that is safe for your children. He sort of proved that was profitable as well. So there are a lot of ways that I hesitate to make him too much of a main character, but in a lot of ways we kind of make him a marker in our book.
And he paved the way for so many after him who followed that same example. And because I think something we talk about in the early part of the book is the other things that were going on around this time. Kelsey mentioned the culture war, the political elements. There also were things like the inerrancy movement, the rise of complementarian thinking, the prosperity gospel teaching, the nouthetic movement that kind of said biblical counseling and in place of secular voices of authority, kind of a skepticism for that. So all of that kind of creates this really perfect storm that has people looking for trusted spiritual authorities to say, here's the biblical way to do things. And so certainly, yeah, focus on the family, Dobson, they are the ones a lot of people think of, but after them come the Ezzos, and they built an international global ministry. You have Bill Gothard.
And that was specifically Growing Kids God's Way. Some of you may recognize that title. Yeah.
Yeah. Or Baby Wise. They also went for the secular market too. So you have, of course, Bill Gothard is doing this in the 70s and 80s as well. And then once influencer culture begins in the 2000s, you have kind of little offshoots, people doing mini Christian parenting empires because the information, access for information is changing. But the formula is still kind of similar. Here's the biblical way to do things. And then someone becomes a trusted voice. They build a platform. People are looking to them for advice, often self-platformed, often self-credentialed, often no accountability in the sense that down the road, who's going to go back and talk to who's going to challenge these teachings? A lot of times they just kept being recycled.
Yeah. I remember in the mid-90s, Keith, you and I were in Toronto.
Yep.
And you were doing a residency at the Hospital for Sick Children in pediatrics, and we were having our babies.
Yes.
And that idea that there is a Christian way to do parenting, and then there is the secular way to do parenting, like we still did buy into that.
Oh yeah. Well, that was a huge part of the culture back then. People don't realize that. And you're right. Dobson was a big figure. Like, I mean, my secular training, they talked about Dobson, right? Because they saw him as a very dangerous movement because he was basically presenting as truth that this is the way to do things when all the evidence and science was in the other direction, right? And I remember at the time, like, pastors were saying, well, eventually science will catch up to the Bible and we'll, that kind of stuff. But it's just as the evidence kept pouring in, like it's just everything was based upon their preconceived notion of how to interpret the Bible, and they just decided to ignore the evidence to preserve that interpretation rather than helping kids.
Yep.
And you still see it in resources, and people say, God's ways are higher. Take this on faith. Even if you don't, whatever the evidence is, take this on faith. And you're right. It's the preconceived idea, and it has such a stranglehold on the evangelical community in particular, I think.
Yeah. I think Christian parenting resources, they tapped into a market, like James Dobson tapped into a market of a culture that was scared. You had the Vietnam War, you had all this cultural upheaval. It's like, how do I make my kids not weird and not do something terrible? And so I think the Christian parenting market had a carrot and a stick, right? Like they had the threat and then they had the promise. Yes. And I'll read what you said about the promise. You said in your book, and again, the book that we're talking about is The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. It's out October 14th. I think it is very soon. Yes, around then. And here we go. The promise was Christian parenting resources depend on promises made to parents. If you get it right, then there will be desired results. If not now, then somewhere down the road. The potent expectation for children to be discipled into right belief and right practice from infancy on up keeps families working hard, powered by everything from board books about systematic theology to prayer guides for grandparents. Christian experts, often self-credentialed and self-platformed, explain how to bring meaning to the mundane, to wrangle the chaos of family life, and to do parenting with excellence. And so that's the promise. Like we can give you those desired results. The threat, of course, is if you don't parent in the right way, your child is going to go to hell. They won't be right with God. They won't be a Christian. The world's going to get a hold of them. Insert whatever threat you want. But that was very present too.
Yeah, the threats vary. And it's interesting to see which kind of threat, if you don't do this, then this, which authors are concerned about which ones. James Dobson, Dare to Discipline, written in 1970, he's really not going after the your children's eternal souls are at risk. He's going at the American society is at risk. Like we have these anti-authoritarian children who do not respect authority, and this is the problem, right? Like the world, our like very the fabric of American society is crumbling, and it's because parents are afraid to discipline their children. So that's like a common theme of Dobson's work, is going like they're delinquents, they're anti-authoritarian. Funny enough, the another book that came out that same year that was less popular but still very popular was Larry Christensen's The Christian Family. He was a charismatic Lutheran, and he was highly influenced by the book The Cross and the Switchblade, which is about sort of gang activity in the inner city. And similarly, that book, your children are going to join gangs. They're going to get addicted to drugs. Your daughters are going to get pregnant. Like in the 70s, the flavor really is like your children are going to be criminals. And then as
they're going to be the type of kids who go to Woodstock, and they're going to
1,000%. Yes, exactly. They're going to be hippies. They're going to all of these sort of, cultural fears of that moment. And then as you get further into like the 80s and early 90s is when you start to get this almost more like spiritually self-serious, like you are the spiritual mediator for your children. You do this work of the Holy Spirit for your children. And so it is interesting to me to see how different authors zoom in on different threats over time, and how even some of those perceived threats change with like political and cultural currents as well.
Yeah. That is fascinating. But I think the one overarching thing that I think, and tell me if you agree with this, that you see throughout what makes Christian parenting, specifically Christian parenting, is the idea of parental authority, right? That it all starts from parents having authority over their children and needing to control them, disciple them, break their spirits, insert whatever verb you want here, right?
Well, and I think the thing for me is that the word disciple like gets used in a negative, like, or even just discipline means spanking, all these things. So like I think that parents are supposed to disciple their children. I just don't think we should disciple them the way that Christian parenting books say, because it is like Sheila said, all about authority and obedience as opposed to shepherding a child.
And one of the things you talked about, which I think is so interesting, is the idea of instant obedience, how obedience isn't real unless it's instant. Tell me about that. Tell me about that, Marissa.
Yeah, so it's sometimes referred to as first-time obedience, or you'll hear these little kind of jingles that are taught to children right away, all the way with a happy heart, that kind of obedience. And it absolutely ties in with ideas about authority, the hierarchy in the home. Like maybe some of us are familiar with the umbrella we've seen from Gothard's ministry, but it's that idea circulates in many forms. Ted Tripp calls it a circle of blessing. Others use other names, but the idea is there is a place and hierarchy where you need to submit to the authority above you without question, instantly. And it's important for parents to teach children to do that. Often they're told, you need to do this so your children will know how to obey God instantly. So it comes with this spiritual catechesis kind of as well. That takes it from, I mean, it's interesting to read. Yeah, some of the early Dobson books, early focus on the family books, that are much more pragmatic, kind of like, we just want the household to run smoothly. Like it's important to kind of, it's almost behavioristic, like just condition your child to obey. And then later you get this sense of like, you really need to plumb their hearts. You really need to teach them to obey. Every moment becomes this moment to share the gospel or take your children to the cross. And often those kinds of phrases are used in the books that I think makes it very difficult for sincerely devout Christian parents to walk away, because of course they're concerned about their child's spiritual well-being. Of course they would like their child to obey God someday. And so this idea that if I let that tantrum slide, I might be jeopardizing their spiritual well-being down the road, or I might be endorsing rebellion, becomes really motivating for a lot of parents, particularly when experts are kind of saying, that's your job. Your job is to get that first-time obedience. That is your primary job. And then, of course, the primary tool that's often given is spanking.
What I find so interesting is like, if you look at Jesus's teachings, instant obedience isn't there really.
Right.
Like, how many parables were there?
Right.
About, hey,
In
as
fact,
long
he
as
has
you
a
get it
parable
right.
about that, right? The two
Yeah.
sons, the one who says all obey and doesn't, and the one who doesn't, which truly obeyed. Yes.
Mhm.
Well, and that's worth noting, because as we say in our book, many of these resources, sermons, conferences, all of them have a lot to say about Christian parenting and little to say about Jesus, little to say about the life, ministry, and teaching of Jesus. Remarkably so. I wish I could underscore for people that reality. Like,
well, let's give an example. Let's give an example, shall we? Okay,
Sounds great.
So I have a clip from Nancy Wilson, who is the wife of Doug Wilson, who hit the news a couple of weeks ago in early August, when an interview went live on CNN, whose church argues that slavery wasn't that bad, that women shouldn't have the right to vote, that women should obey their husbands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just lovely all around. And here is Nancy Wilson explaining how she dealt with the fact that when she arrived at a play date to pick up her daughter wasn't happy to see her.
Rachel was visiting a friend. She was probably 3 or 4 in that before school age. And our neighbor had little kids, and so we would trade back and forth. So I went over to pick her up. And when I walked in, she said, "Oh, is it time to go?" So I thought, perfect opportunity. I got her home. I didn't address it there. But I did give her spanking. It's true. I did. But I just said, when I come in, you're going to say, "Hi, Mom." You know, that's how we do this. So the next time she went over there, I did the review. Now remember, when I come, you're going to say, "Hi, Mom." You're not going to say, "Oh, I didn't want to go." So it was beautiful, because then when I picked her up, it was just all that, yes, Mom is here at last. Yeah, but it's just that training.
All right, Kelsey, what do you think of that?
I mean, I laugh, and I don't think it's funny. I've seen this clip so many times now. I laugh because, having written this book now and spent so much time in these books, it's comical how recycled this idea is, how far removed it is from the example of Christ, and just how it displays this adversarial relationship between parents and children that we see figures like this creating. And we don't reference it a lot in our book because it's a little afield, but there's Jason Blakely is a philosopher, political philosopher, who has a book called Lost in Ideology. And he talks about how sometimes we basically create our reality out of our ideology. And that is what these people are doing, is they're saying, you are in a battle of wills with your child and you must win every time. And everything is potentially an affront to your parental authority, and you need to be there right there every time to answer it. And when we were reading these interviews that we did with people who he got in touch with for this book, you can see the fruit of that, just growing up in a household where you and your parent are at odds because your parents saw you as a threat to your authority all the time. It just makes me sad. So I shouldn't laugh, but it's unoriginal. It shows up every time, and it's a problem of our own making. It's a problem of our own making.
Do you think she really thought that was beautiful, Marissa? Like, she says, "Oh, it was beautiful," like that her daughter said, "Hi, Mommy." Like, do you think she really thought it was?
I think it is in the water in Doug Wilson's community and communities like that, because that is the way everyone is treated. Like, I will often say, the way children are treated in a church system will be the way individuals in that church family system will be treated. And when you're in a community like that says you choose joy, you put the smile on, like you obey, you know what I mean? There's where feeling is suppressed. I think that is a marker of the desired goal that they perceive is sanctification or Christianity. What's so unfortunate is it's incredibly short-sighted, because it's training children, yes, and training parents, training everyone in this kind of performativeness, performative joy that says, oh, well, everything is right, this inauthentic relationship. And it down the road, I mean, it's hard to think of a more accurate, like a more powerful recipe for inauthentic connection and estrangement than that, where you say, I will spank you into being happy to see me, and you will act that out. And then down the road, people are wondering, well, why does my child, who did finally reclaim their autonomy, why do they want nothing to do with me? How can we not have a connection? I don't even know them anymore. Because
or why does my child, who maybe still does talk to me, why does my child keep getting into abusive relationships and not seem to ever stand up for themselves, because they've so disconnected themselves from their own emotions that they can't recognize red flags.
They can't, right? And or identify their own desires or their own emotions, and all the other things that I mentioned earlier that play into this nouthetic biblical counseling bolster this, and it is just devastating fruit. And so I think, that clip went viral a couple of years ago, and they doubled down. They doubled down and defended it. So I think absolutely they are pleased with that. It's really tragic, I think, because it continues to rob families of authentic connection that could be theirs when those kind of recipes are presented as like, that's good, this kind of robotic cheerfulness out of fear of punishment.
Well, and I think she was referring to when Rachel was like 3 or 4, like it sounded like from the context. And let's just take a step back here. So what she's saying is, I, as a mother, am upset when my child doesn't show joy. And so my child has to be disciplined and changed so that my child can coddle my feelings, and so that my child can attune herself to my feelings.
Yes. I was just going to say, Ann Holbert has written a history of a history of parenting in the US, and she refers to James Dobson as parent-centered and evangelical parenting as parent-centered parenting. That's a label she gives it. And that's because that is exactly what you're pointing out, is the outgrowth is how I feel my authority is being respected or not tells me how I should parent. Like, I need to parent in whatever way makes my child make me feel like I am being respected. And that's exactly what we're seeing there. And you can just see in that description of that interchange how that child then is going to grow up feeling they are seen by their parent, right? And also how parents see their children. I mean, it's so tragic for everyone. Like, we respond differently to our kids when we perceive them as a threat to us, right? Like, that robs parents of a different view of their children as well.
Yeah. And it also creates this dynamic where parents perceive their children as extensions of themselves. So and I think Wilson's community, you see this really, really powerfully, in that those adult children are all grown. They are in the community producing content that says the same thing for the next generation. And in the recent CNN interview that Wilson did, he said that his father, who was a pastor, said that if any of his kids departed the Christian faith, he would step down from ministry. So this incredible pressure on everyone that says, I can and should shape my child into this thing I think they should be, and they are a reflection of me. They are my testimony in the world. I mean, it's just, it's coming at families from all angles. And then the people whom it works, which I question in a lot of ways, but they are platformed so that everyone thinks, oh, well, that is the goal. If I do this right, I can have generational legacy where everybody's a Christian and everybody's cheerful and joyful and close, and whatever is being presented as the desirable legacy, which is why we use the language of myth, because it appeals to understandable longings, but it doesn't hold up.
I find that so funny because, like, in scripture, even God has a prodigal son, right? Like in that story of the prodigal son, the father represents God. So even God didn't have like a, like a legacy like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, like the heart of God is for us, right? And the parent's heart toward their child is a theme throughout the Bible, right? Like God uses that as an example. So to me, it's like I want what's best for my child. So when you train me as a parent to think about me and my getting my respect and authority, you are killing a part of me that would be a good parent,
Yeah.
to force it into your theological constraints to produce the kind of person you want to produce, which is an unhealthy person in the end. It's so sad.
But like we know this, right? We know this because so much research has been done on what raises healthy kids. How did we get to the point, and this is the question that keeps me up at night, when Christians just decided to ignore all that and platform people with no credentials?
Yeah.
That's such a
I
good
don't even know
question.
who wants to answer, but like someone tell me.
Right. Well, I mean, Dobson did have credentials. I mean, that's part of
Yes.
what made him so winsome was that like he was Dr. James Dobson. He worked at Los Angeles Children's. He had some kind of credential and also experience in the classroom and was sharing all these stories of these children who he was working with. He seemed um so trustworthy, and he was also a very good communicator. I was just recently listening to something Sky Jatani, who is a co-host of the Holy Post podcast, said evangelicals have often been discipled by media, and Dobson was discipling people through media starting in the 70s. And I think as evangelicals have gotten so comfortable being discipled by media, uh, they ask less and less of experts, especially when it comes to parenting. I think we see it now with parenting influencers. Gosh, there's a lot just to be said about Instagram parenting influencers and the perceived authority that they have based on attractiveness, wealth, race, the looks of their children, aesthetics. I mean, all of these things are things that are kind of giving authority to people and helping them build these massive platforms. How we got here, it's been a long process, but I do think Dobson was a start, and he was sort of a soft start because he did have those credentials, but he very quickly started distancing himself from his credentials.
Well,
And
didn't he give
so it's
up? Like he
complicated.
left the American Psychological Association in the early
Yes, he
70s,
did.
right?
He
Yeah.
did.
Yep. And that really played, and I'm sure you see this all the time in the marriage teaching, Sheila, that Jay Adams was also in 1970, Competent to Counsel came out. And so this idea.
And Jay, just for our listeners, Jay Adams was the founder of the biblical counseling movement. It was called nouthetic counseling at the time, but the biblical counseling movement is the idea that the Bible is sufficient for everything we need for counseling, and we need to ignore secular counseling or any kind of mental health or psychology research. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is happening along with this reassertion of the idea of inerrancy and the countercultural movement of people like Francis Schaeffer and people like that who are saying, look, we need to be skeptical of humanism, secular humanism, and these external voices of authority. And I think the way that trickled down into, to the people sitting in the pews is they did not believe other voices of experience. Instead of saying all truth is God's truth, they said, no, I need someone to say what's biblical for me, and it's going to be coming through specific voices of authority, and anybody else, I'm going to reject what they're saying. And you see this very much either or. You still see it today, right? Like, oh, well, that person's progressive, so they can't have anything good to say. I'm not going to listen to them. Or this person takes that political, or whatever the insider outsider markers become. And so it created, in many ways, it's a prototype for what we see now. It created echo chambers even before we had social media, where people were in this kind of like closed off publishing ministry resource environments, and just were set up to reject anything that could have contradicted the narrative that was being presented by people whom they trusted. That's a big piece of this too, because there was an audience for them. People trusted James Dobson.
Well, I know one of the questions that I get, and this is in the parenting realm, but I'm constantly getting pastors emailing me saying, I need a good marriage book to recommend to people, but I don't have anything. And now, of course, we have The Marriage You Want,
Yay.
which was out this year. So now they can have that. But until The Marriage You Want, there just weren't like Christian marriage resources that were safe. And I would often say, well, you could do John Gottman, like it's secular, but it's based in research. But a lot of people said, no, we have to have something that's Christian or people won't read it, right? And I think that's what's happened is like, we have to go for the Christian parenting as opposed to realizing that Jesus is the truth. And so when we find truth about humanity, about child development, it is true. You know, and yes, we need information on how to literally disciple our kids, but how to potty train or how to handle temper tantrums is actually quite consistent, whether you're Christian or not. And the idea that Christians have a different way of doing all of this and that we have the right way has really hampered, I think, people's curiosity to actually listen to evidence, which I think is too bad. And speaking of that, let's do another clip, shall we? I want to talk about, I have 2 clips here on how a lot of parenting, quote unquote, experts see the essence of childhood. So, because this dictates everything about how we approach parenting, right? Is what do we think our children are? And so I'm going to play this one first from an influencer. I don't even understand her significance. I saw this clip has gone viral lately, but Marissa, do you want to explain? This is on Allie Beth Stuckey's podcast, and who is the one talking in this clip?
Yes. So Allie Beth is interviewing Abby Halberstadt, who's also, her handle across social media is M is for Mama. She's written several books that are best-selling books for mothers in particular. She's a mother of 10. She's an influencer who began in like the mommy blogging days. But yeah, so that's who Allie Beth is interviewing. And I think they've had multiple conversations over the years on Allie Beth's podcast and things like that.
Okay, so let's listen in on this.
You a gentle parent?
What do y'all think? I really want to encourage you to look closely at the undergirding of the philosophies that are behind a movement that essentially tells you you do not need a savior. Because the gentle parenting movement, one of the biggest accounts within it, their tagline is good inside. You are not good inside, and neither are your children. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And the Bible tells us this explicitly. It does not mean that our children don't have some element of innocence in which they have not enacted sin as babies in the same way that you and I have actively chosen sin. It does not mean that there isn't some sort of age of accountability, although I think it can vary per child. However, if we are to deny the fact that we are capable of anger and jealousy and strife and envy and selfishness from such an early age, we are to deny ourselves the opportunity to share the gospel with our children. And if you think I'm exaggerating, all you need to do is go on a gentle parenting forum during Easter and watch them tie themselves in knots by calling themselves Christians, but not being able to say that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, because substitutionary atonement is anathema to the philosophy of gentle parenting, which says you do not need.
All right. So children aren't good inside.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, so for those who aren't familiar, this is a direct reference to Becky Kennedy, who is a kind of a popular mainstream parenting podcaster, writer, and her platform is called Good Inside. She has a book called Good Inside. So this is really like a push against her specifically. And yeah, there are a lot of folks, especially in the Reformed kind of circles of evangelicalism, who really dislike Becky Kennedy, often I think simply because of that title. I wonder how much of her content they have interacted with, because I think they would find most of it is very straightforward, authoritative parenting stuff that is neither kind of touchy-feely and permissive nor authoritarian. I think, that's just my view, but I think that good inside has become this boogeyman. People are like, well, see, the world is going to tell your kids that they're perfect, that they're just good inside. So that's why
what
you
about
can't listen
sin
to anything
then?
they would say.
Right.
What about sin?
What about sin? I find this fascinating because a little bit of understanding of Christian history might show people something different. Because, like, what's the Eastern Orthodox view
Oh yeah.
of?
Yeah. This is such a distorted version. It's like there's this extreme they go to that we are wicked, evil in the core of our being, which is not the Christian viewpoint. I mean, that
Well,
completely
it is like the
it's a
reform.
but
It's
it's
a
a hyper
sliver.
extreme.
Yeah.
And it basically says there is no image of God in us anymore. Like it gets rid of that completely, right? And if you don't think that you're in all ways evil, then you think we're perfect just the way we are and we don't need Jesus. And
Hmm.
it's like what a distortion. That's not reality. I mean, even Paul talks about, the good I want to do, I don't do. But like inside, there's a good he wants to do.
Hmm.
Like he's still a sinner, but like inside, there's good, right? Like, and so saying that to kids is positive, right? Like
Hmm.
we want you to be the best you can be, you
Yeah,
know?
and like the Eastern Orthodox view is not the original sin
Yeah.
view.
Mm.
Um, I'm not Eastern Orthodox, but like I'm quite aware that within Christianity there is multiple ways of understanding
Right.
our nature, our fundamental nature. And I think what Abby is doing here is setting up a straw man,
Yes.
which is either you are perfect or you are a 3-year-old who suffers. Well, she listed all kinds of sins there. What is it? Envy and strife and these things that like a 2 and 3-year-old is supposed to have. Like, what is there? As opposed to saying, okay, our children just want connection. They want like a baby wants connection with you. A toddler wants connection, and they also need to learn emotional regulation, and they need to learn how to exercise autonomy in the world. And they're still learning this at a young age. But kids can be very good. They want love.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this kind of teaching is so problematic for what it says and also what it misses out on, which is an understanding of child development. So often, whatever theological framework the parent is working from or the community they're in is all of that's going to be projected onto a child, which is how you end up with someone thinking, well, what's the sin in my child's heart that they threw their food on the floor or something? And sometimes the experts will be saying directly those things. I mean, shepherding a child's heart is still one of the most popular Christian parenting resources. And Ted Tripp does this throughout. He talks about 6-year-olds as kind of like sex addicts. He talks about 7-year-olds as little hypocrites. He normalized, I think, for a whole generation, this idea that parents should be the Holy Spirit plumbing their depths of their child's heart for sin and calling that out and responding to it and kind of like putting that off again, that off on thing. He was very much trained up in the biblical counseling movement. So I think it's become so normal for a lot of families, particularly second generation evangelical families, that the idea that that is a very unique and new and specifically white American evangelical way of thinking about parenting is not even on their radar. So the idea that, yes, children are good inside, or the idea that, yes, Genesis 1 and 2 talks about humans, the Imago Dei, as good. The idea that it could be anything but what they're holding on to, of like it's of primary importance to tell young children that they're sinful so that they can say the sinner's prayer. And I do think you see this teaching much more popular in believers' baptism communities. I mean, it's elsewhere as well, but you see it much more popular because the pressure is really on. Like, you need to, as soon as you can, tell your child this message so they can understand their sins, so they can understand the need for the Savior, so they can say the prayer and they can be saved. And as you pointed out, Sheila, the historic position of the church across the centuries has not been that. But that is the loudest voice in Christian parenting resources.
Yeah. And what happens when you see your children, like when you look at your child and your first thought is they are essentially evil, and I need to then what happens is every time your child has a meltdown, you view that through a sin lens instead of, oh, maybe they're tired. right? Or maybe they're needing more attention, or maybe we've been too busy today and I haven't sat down and just looked at them eye to eye and spent some time with them, or, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And
It's
again,
so dangerous.
yeah.
Yeah,
And again,
it's
all
so
these things are
dangerous.
things that natural, regular people would naturally think. And what our Christian resources have done is trained people to
Yes.
be worse parents than they would have been just following their heart and doing what came naturally as a parent.
Mhm.
Because we're
Yeah.
taking theology and we're using it to twist people's way of looking at
Yes.
things in a way that makes them worse than they were before.
Yeah, well, you
It's
think
sad.
about Jesus saying, which one of you fathers, if your child asked for bread, would give them a stone,
Yeah.
right? Or if your child was asked for an egg, would give them a serpent or something like
Yeah.
that, right? Like he's like, no, like you obviously parents want to do good for their kid. Like you want to love your kid. That's the natural bent. And yet these Christian resources can't say that. They can't say your natural bent is to want to do good for your kid, because our natural bent has to be to see our kids as evil. And so let's play another clip.
Okay.
This one's from Vadi Bakum, who is a pastor. At one point, he was potentially going to run for leadership of the SBC, but he's said some pretty controversial things. And here's one of them.
And I'll say it again. It's not a little angel. That's a viper in a diaper. You come into this world, you can barely open your eyes. For months, you can barely hold up your head. You have to grab his head now. You can't sit up. You can't talk. You can't crawl. You can't walk. But you can let everybody know that you're running things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Viper in a diaper.
Yeah. This has become this quote that recirculates over and over again. And it's an example of a couple of things. One is this trying to get parents very early on comfortable with this. My child is a sinner. My child is a sinner. Ken Ham does this. Ted Tripp does this. It's everywhere. So there's this attempt to kind of desensitize parents to, I think, the needs of their children, the immaturely expressed needs. It's trying to kind of prime parents to see all of this is selfishness or manipulative. Your child crying in the night, it's because they are selfish. It's because they are manipulating you. Look, even from the womb, they know how to do this. That's how endemic sin is in humanity. So it's that. It's also this humor that we often see these pastor, teacher, writers use, I think, as a way to kind of endear themselves to the audience and to also take the edge off, to kind of make it seem not so serious. Like this isn't that big of a deal. There's so much joking out there about spanking, which I'm convinced is there so that parents just don't think it's that serious, like it's just this desensitizing. And so when you hear that preached to a room full of people and you hear chuckles, it kind of like drops for a laugh, that's what's going on there, I think.
It's so dehumanizing and it's incredibly dangerous because particularly parents who are overwhelmed are in the overwhelming season of parenting, then absolutely do look at their child who can't sleep through the night as an antagonist and also in a dehumanized way. And we saw this about a year ago. There was a popular influencer on Twitter who kind of said that about his, I think, 4-month-old son who wasn't sleeping, like, Lord, give me grace to discipline him, like this idea that rather than the invitation for the parent to grow in the face of discomfort or to cultivate patience or long suffering or any number of fruit of the spirit in what could be a hard circumstance, the parent stays in their position unchanged and says, this child who, according to Christian belief, God designed to develop from immaturity to maturity. God designed dependent and needy and immature to look to a parent. So kind of looking at God's design as flawed in that sense and saying, why isn't this child performing the way I expect a more mature adult should perform? And then perceiving that as sin, and often as sin that needs to be punished or atoned for in some way. It's incredibly dangerous. And it's how Vodi then goes on and talks about all-day spanking sessions or spanking 5 times by breakfast. And I do think the humor cloaks the abuse, because that kind of teaching directly enables abuse. Like whatever the person saying it means, that is what will happen behind closed doors when frustrated parents look at their child who's having a hard time, who can't comply in the way the parent wants, when the parent's simply overwhelmed and they now are empowered to respond in this way. It makes me so angry when I see it, because it continues to come in different forms, in different ways. We saw influencers a couple of weeks ago, Gen Z influencers, saying this, and it will just propagate. And I think Christians need to be the loudest voices saying no more of that.
Yeah. I think one of the things too, when I think about, what Vade Bakum said, is that idea that that baby who's crying in that crib is trying to control the family. And it reminds me of something that Doug Wilson said, and I saw this clip on your Instagram feed, Marissa, from about a year ago, where he was talking about how to spank, and how you used an implement and the reign of terror that children can have, and how sometimes when a baby, and he was talking specifically about babies, when they're just crying and there's absolutely nothing you can do, you've tried changing their diaper, you've tried everything, and they're still crying, then you just leave them in another part of the house and let them cry, because you're not making a difference anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, so you're really teaching parents to unattach from their children.
Yeah. It's teaching detachment. And it's also gives a glimpse. All of this, right, is wrapped up to people's view of God too. And it really reveals the theology there, that God is detached, that God doesn't care about people's suffering. He's not going to come when you call. You should cheerfully comply in your hardship. That's what he's most interested in, is your behavior, not in connection with you. And so this idea that is what parents would be offering as well. Like, you're cry. I think in that clip, he says, jokingly, of course, the baby should learn early on that man is born to trouble, to count it all joy. So it's very much wrapped up in an entire worldview that sees that as the human condition as well. And yeah, it's cultivating detachment, and parents are training themselves to do that day in and day out.
And I think one of the appeals of this stuff, of like Doug Wilson saying, you don't have to pick up your kid, they'll be perfectly fine if you leave them on the other side of the house, or Nancy Wilson telling you just to spank your kid when they make you feel bad about yourself, so they'll stop making you feel bad about yourself, is that it does work. So you get overwhelmed parents, like it works in the short term, right? You get the kid's still crying, the baby's still crying, but at least they're not in the same room as you, so it's not bugging you as much. This child now smiles when you want them to, even though it's not genuine. But you feel placated. And I think one of the problems, and maybe Abby, M for Mama, was getting at some of this, and this is maybe why she is so popular, is that actual parenting, healthy parenting, takes time. It's hard. If you have a baby who's 4 months old and not sleeping, that is hard. It's exhausting. I've gone through that. My kids have gone through that. It's really, really rough, and you feel sometimes like you're losing your mind.
Yeah.
And when a Christian gives you what looks like a relatively easy answer, like the Edzos telling parents just not to get kids out of bed in the middle of the night anymore when they're crying, and make them sleep, force them to sleep through the night, even if they wail all night at, I don't know how young they did it, 2 months old.
They said you could have your child sleep trained by 8 weeks. They said start in the second week postpartum.
Right.
It's bananas.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Keith, what does the Canadian Pediatric Society say about that?
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The thing I was thinking of, like when I first saw that clip of the child knowing they can control the whole household from birth. My thought was, what kind of person sees a baby crying and the first thought is that they're trying to control, right? I was so angry, but then I thought, actually, the kind of person who was raised like that,
Yeah.
because your parents didn't love you. Because I'm sorry, but ignoring children, not attending to children when they're crying, when they need you, is not love. And so if you're not loved, you don't like this seems natural. This is the way that the world works. And it's just so sad because it's like I said earlier, you've killed a part of your heart. This is just not what God wants for us. And the Bible is so full of other examples of how to parent your children. This is such a devastatingly horrendous misreading of God's view of what it means to be a parent. It's just so sad.
So sad. And almost to a one, the Christian parenting experts offer anecdotes from their own childhood that reveal that. Doug Wilson talks about his father with his fist in front of his face and spanking him up the stairs. And Ted Tripp talks about a chaotic background. And, so I do think there's something there where Dobson does as well. A number of them do. And that is, I think, what they received and part of why they're so able to say that's what should happen.
Yeah. Yeah. When you grew up with anxious or avoidant attachment yourself, you think that that's normal.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're going to perpetuate that. And if you can call it Christian, then you have a way of convincing yourself that you're healthy when you're not.
Yeah.
Right. And that seems to be so much of what's happened.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when I read these, I can see, there just is some baby and child behavior that is triggering as a parent that makes you angry or makes you anxious or makes you feel like something is wrong. And if you are someone who grew up in a household that was chaotic, or someone who did have an anxious or detached relationship with your parent, that feels bad and it feels really hard. And I think for some parents, these resources offered an answer to who sinned that this is so hard. Like, who sinned that this parenting moment is so difficult, right? It's like this question being posed of Jesus: who sinned that this is happening right now? And it gave the answer: your child who's a sinner, who you need to kind of help get into shape here. And I think for some parents who are really struggling, that felt good. It felt like it gave their discomfort a place to land. It made them feel like their anger was a righteous anger that was somehow reflective of God's anger. Like, I think when these resources put parents in the position of God, they can very quickly feel that, okay, I'm angry because God would be angry at this. Like, God, if God were sitting right here and this was, that was this relationship, God would not let this slide, And I think that for some parents is appealing and can be even a balm when you feel like something is going wrong here and I don't know what to do. It can feel like an answer and a very satisfying, correct answer that then gives you this tool. Then the tool is sort of, and that's why you must spank your children. That's why you must discipline decisively and immediately.
Yeah, and as soon as you see your child as that sinner, the one who's caused this, then the whole concept of breaking their spirit and seeing a child as someone who has to be defeated and broken down so that they can be rebuilt in your image, that's how this can happen. And that idea of breaking their spirit, I mean, the Pearls did it and to train up a child, but they're not the only ones, right? Like, the children need to be broken. Because of this terrible sin nature, does just appear over and over again, as opposed to understanding children need connection so they can learn emotional regulation.
Yeah. I mean, even adjusting by the standards of different conversations for different eras. Yeah, this was intentionally marking a different choice, a different anthropology of children. primarily around sin and misbehavior. And I think it really appealed to a lot of new parents and new converts too. Something we found, like a lot of people were drawn into this because they came back to faith once they had kids, or were coming to faith for the first time and thinking, I want to do this the Christian way. Like, I want to please God. And they were handed these resources, and many of which were written by people who had very young children at the time as well.
Yeah,
So
how many people realize that James Dobson was writing Dare to Discipline when he had like toddlers, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had a baby and a preschooler when he wrote that. So it's almost entirely theoretical. And as you mentioned, it may work for a time or appear to work with certain children, but it doesn't. And it certainly doesn't hold up long term. And which is why I think you see less material from talking about those older years or things like that. So much of it is focused on like the first 5 or 6 years.
Well, and again, because the aim of this is the instant obedience and to get kids' outward behavior to be what I want it to be. It's not actually about training character, no matter how much they may say it is, because you can't train character unless you give children autonomy. You have to give children autonomy to choose, because that is the basis for character. And trying to control them eradicates that. The other thing that I find so interesting, and we touched on this already, but is the complete lack of Bible in all of these biblical books. And especially
wild.
Yeah, like they all say they're biblical and they'll just prove text out of a proverb or two or out of Hebrews or something. And none of it has anything to do with the character of Jesus. And I have a clip to prove this. Okay. So I've taken, this is a 6-minute John Piper's answering a question. Would Jesus spank? And his answer is yes, Jesus absolutely would spank. And in fact, the fact that she is asking the question, or that this person is asking, shows that they have a wrong view of God. And so I'll put a link to his whole 6-minute answer, but let's just listen to 1 minute of it. Okay.
I mean, I could give a whole theology of spanking here, but maybe boil it down to why does this person feel squeamish? And my guess is it's a wrong view of God. I mean, deep down, does this person believe that God brings pain into our lives? Because Hebrews 12 makes the direct connection between God disciplines every son whom he loves and spanks everyone that he delights in. My paraphrase. And the point there is suffering. God brings sufferings into our life, and the writer of the Hebrews makes the connection between the parenting of God of his children through suffering. This is a wrong view of God. God uses suffering to discipline his children. So do we. Now, you don't damage a child. You don't like that and make a big black eye or break his arm. Children have little fat bottoms so that they can be whopped.
All right. So we have the wrong view of God because we need to realize that God causes our suffering.
Yeah.
People, I want y'all to listen, okay? Everyone's listening. Can you see how that view of God, the only thing that God is worried about is making us obey him. And so he is going to hurt us so that we obey him. And so we should absolutely assume that Jesus would spank babies. Can you see how that view of God influences how we see parenting?
Oh, man. Yeah, I have heard so many really contorted explanations of why this is the case, like why spanking is Christ-like. This is one of them. Another one that someone said to me once was, well, spanking is like how Jesus dealt with us, one and done, like saying like spanking was like the crucifixion. It was like a one and done. But it's when you take like 2 seconds to dig underneath that and think about what does that say about atonement and sin, and it was Christ's work on the cross not for all sin, like not for the sins of my child, or am I not supposed to let them think that it was for am I not supposed to let them think that their sins are covered? It's so strange. And people do all kinds of strange theological gymnastics to get there. I am not a theologian, so I'll let Marissa speak more to that. But I, even as like a lay person and a researcher reading all of these different examples, I just find myself pulling my hair out because they just morph and change, and people bend the person of Christ and Christ's work to suit the case they want to make.
Before Marissa even comes in, you guys have a free pre-order bonus about what John Piper was talking about.
Yep.
So I just want to plug that. So Marissa, don't lose your train of thought because you're going to come back to it in a sec. But what he was saying about Hebrews 12 being about spanking, you guys have some pre-order bonuses, and one of them, I think 3, one of them is about how Hebrews 12 is not about God spanking us.
Yes. Yes.
So if you pre-ordered the Myth of Good Christian Parenting, where can people go to get the pre-order bonuses?
We will give you a link to put in the show notes because Baker set up a little page. And even if you pre-ordered earlier this summer, you can still get the bonuses.
Yes.
So just go and put your input then and there, and we hope they'll be a help for you. We tried to do kind of the FAQs of the Christian case against spanking in these downloadable resources. So share them widely, please, with people who you think might benefit. But yeah, I mean, this is not unusual. I have a picture book on my shelf that's got this idea that God took my licking for me. And the idea that God spanked Jesus in some form shows up in sermons and a number of things in the popular Christian conversation, even outside of parenting resources. And it's so unfortunate because it is a distortion of a very rudimentary reading of what's called penal substitutionary atonement, which is a theory of atonement, a relatively recent theory, one among many theories. And I say that because I often hear from people pretty regularly that my discussion of Christian parenting resources is the very first time they've heard that there's multiple theories on the atonement. They have been in corners of the church where they have only been presented with this kind of like very simplistic version of this one that is, God's wrath needs to be meted out on somebody. So Jesus took our place so we didn't have to receive it. And that's the good news for everyone. And then of course that rudimentary version of this gets correlated over to what we call liturgized spanking in our book, because often it comes with a lot of liturgy and ritual, so that then the parent is role-playing the role of God, and the child is being spanked to atone in some way, and that brings about the reconciliation that can happen after. And it is distorted theology. I think it's not good news. And it is bananas to me how widely this has been propagated, how many people have been spiritually formed by this. And you see it even in Bobby's clip earlier at the very end of it.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, she says, she references substitutionary atonement. I think she means penal substitutionary atonement specifically. But the idea being, if we don't get serious about sin in our children, they will miss the entire gospel, because in that framework, the entire gospel is this idea that sin, punishment, substitutionary atonement. And it has long-term repercussions. As we surveyed and interviewed people, for many of them, their current adult relationship with God is this idea, if they still retain faith, is this idea that he's just waiting for them to mess up. He's just waiting to punish. Or if they experience suffering or sorrow, they perceive it as because of something they have done to step outside the circle of his blessing. So it really ties in with these other distorted theologies that are not true. They're not in alignment with the life and teaching of Jesus. They're not in alignment with the good news or even the historic teaching of the Christian church. So I found myself often, like when I read Ted Tripp's book for the first time in researching this, I thought, where were the pastors?
Yeah, and that book is Shepherding a Child's Heart.
Shepherding a Child's Heart. Like, where were the pastors? Because even just a brief reading of this should have shown so many problems. And I don't know if pastors just weren't reading these resources and were just handing them out, or I don't know what happened, that the people who should have been able to say, this is not responsible theological perspective or a good hermeneutical or exegetical approach, there was a failure there in the way some of these continue to circulate, without people who could have said, no, this isn't sound, being able to identify that. So
yeah, and if you don't know what we're talking about when it comes to different ideas of atonement, N.T. Wright's book, The Day God Became King, is really good about that. Zach Lambert's new book, Better Ways to Read the Bible. Yeah, so just there's
other avenues.
Christianity has 2,000 years of history.
Yes, and I like to recommend Fleming Rutledge's book, The Crucifixion. I love it. It's a big one, but it covers all the major theories of the atonement and the biblical motifs of atonement. So if you're listening and thinking, oh my gosh, that's me, I've never heard, that's a really good one if you want to dig deep and see a number of the different perspectives.
Yeah. I think too, one thing that you said in your book is that people are saying that spanking is supposed to be teaching kids the gospel, but if Jesus was supposed to pay the price for our sins,
yeah, why?
Then are you saying that he didn't pay it for children?
Yeah. Right. People get really inconsistent when you ask that question. Understandably, I don't want to blame people who have practiced this for kind of trusting these teachings, but there's this idea we can't give sin a pass. I can't give sin a pass in my children. But then you ask the question, but is spanking punishing? Do you see spanking as punishing sin? Is that what you're doing? People will backpedal pretty quickly and say, well, Jesus died for sin. That atoning work is done. Well, then why? Well, they need to understand the weight of their sin, like in the same way that God makes us understand the weight of our sin. So then God causes us pain. Well, it just starts to fall apart really quickly. But I think, the uncomfortable truth, I think, for a lot of people is that, again, spanking gives parental anger a place to land. It makes you feel like you've done something. It makes you feel like you haven't given sin a pass, even though the actual breakdown of what you're doing doesn't hold up the way that you might think it does.
Yeah.
Marissa, you were talking about the liturgy of spanking, and I saw, of course, as we're recording this, James Dobson's death is still very fresh. And so my threads is all Taylor and Travis are engaged and Dobson died. Thank goodness, right?
Same.
Right now. And yay, Taylor and Travis, by the way. But one of the recurring themes that I've seen is people criticizing the fact that Dobson made it so clear that you should never spank in anger. Right? That it had to be very deliberate. You couldn't be angry. And Piper says this too, like in the longer clip that I just played. And that afterwards you give them a hug and you tell them that you love them. And the comments from people who grew up in that are saying, so basically my parent was a psychopath. Because I could understand them spanking me if they were angry. I could understand them losing control. But to deliberately hurt me while they were in control of themselves was awful.
Yeah.
And then to make me hug them afterwards.
Make me hug. Yeah. Well, and these are part of the really made up rules that were offered to so many parents to say, here's what will magically turn hitting your child into compliance into something godly and good. Like if we're being really truthful, I do think in the early Dobson resources, it comes across very much just as child conditioning, right? Yeah. Like you are spanking to inflict pain to just get them to stop an undesirable behavior. But as I think as research demonstrated the harm in that, as American society and other nations moved away from that, Christian parents, the Christian Insider group, needed to offer different reasons for this, right? And one that they pulled on was, there's a right way to do this godly way to do this. Be calm, go pray. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to say which is worse for a child, to be spanked by an angry, raging parent or a calm, collected one who's prayed beforehand. In both cases, the child is getting hit by a caregiver. The caregiver's inflicting pain. But I do think the one that then required forced connection and reconciliation afterward to make the parent feel better, I think, for what had happened. Certainly was a recipe for grooming abuse. I mean, it's there on the page. When you look at the steps, this idea that an adult can tell them God wants them to hurt your body, can take you somewhere private, can do that, and that you need to hug afterwards and pretend to be joyful. Like, this is training children up in incredibly dangerous ways that says that's right, you can expect that to happen.
And especially because so often it was done on the bare bum too, right?
Exactly.
Like your bare bottom.
Many children experienced it as child sexual abuse. And we have plenty of adult children now naming the harm of that too. So absolutely.
Yeah, there's been some studies. I wrote an article about this a while ago. I'll put the link in the podcast notes, but how so many people grew up and their arousal pathways were actually really impacted by spanking. And now as adults, they crave that in order to have an orgasm, to get aroused during sex, whatever it might be. It's become part of their sexual pathway, their sexual story. Because, the buttocks are very close to the genitalia. And when you spank, blood rushes to that area. And so you get these tiny, small children with blood rushing to that area. And they can experience arousal without knowing what it is at all. Yeah. And then later, they find that they can't get aroused unless they're hit.
Yeah.
And this isn't, I'm not trying to say the entire BDSM community is like this. I'm not making a statement on the BDSM community. I'm just making a statement on what a lot of research has found.
Well, and a lot of adults named that even to us and said this was confusing, so confusing for them as children. And then particularly people who are still in Christian communities, it comes with so much shame as adults because it's confusing, and who can they speak to about this? And then a number also connected the beginning of self-harm practices to spanking, to say, I felt like I needed to hurt myself to feel forgiven or feel clean again, or to ask an intimate partner to hurt me so I could feel okay again. So it definitely ties into how it could have impacted different people could be varied, but it can tie into some of those really deep-seated things as well.
Yeah, and the big thing you're teaching kids is that people who love you will hurt you.
Yeah.
That love hurts, right? So I think the other issue is that so many people conflate spanking and discipline. So they think that if we're saying you shouldn't spank, we're therefore saying there is no more discipline. And so people will say, well, life was so much better when parents disciplined, and now there is no discipline. And they're talking about spanking. But you can still have a lot of discipline. And you must teach this in the office at all.
Absolutely, yeah. There's and that's the tragic thing is there's so many good ways to help kids, because basically the goal of a parent is to help this child grow into a healthy adult, right? And the goal of discipline is to teach a child self-discipline so that they will do what is good and right when they're an adult, because they know what's good and right, because they've internalized that morality that we're trying to teach them about how to be a good human, right? And there's so many good ways to do that don't involve inflicting pain, and that are better at generating that kind of intrinsic motivation to do the right thing, and just without all the psychological trauma of spanking. And it just takes a bit more work. It's not quick. It's not easy. You can't do a 5-second Instagram clip on it, but it takes a bit more work.
It takes more work. And I suggest too, for some of these parenting experts, the goal isn't healthy autonomy though. The goal is compliance with authority. And I do think if people are honest with that, I hope if there are parents listening to try and think, what is my goal? Because we heard from a lot of people who there was no off-ramp to this, right? So as an adult, if they found a different denomination to participate in, if they voted differently than their parents, any sort of like separation and individuation was perceived as rebellion and lack of compliance. And then that stick came out again, typically with like relational costs. But I totally agree with you. There are so many more healthy tools available, and certainly available to parents now. But that also involves some of the stuff we've talked about earlier, perceiving children as human beings, separate, worthy of dignity, having their own autonomy, some of the other things that are missing from the worldview.
Someone on Instagram sent me this amazing article about a book. So this article, or the book was written in 1988. It was called The Altruistic Personality: Rescuers of Jews in Nazi Europe. And they had done this big study on what are the characteristics of the kind of people who rescued Jews during the Holocaust and during World War II. And I just want to read you this paragraph. Where did it go? Oh, here we go. They said, no less striking is the author's evidence that rescuers, far more than bystanders, came from close, loving families where discipline was light and based on talking and reasoning as opposed to physical punishment. Rescuers reported having learned a value on caring from their parents. Bystanders were more likely than rescuers to report having learned values of obedience and economic competence.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, so corporal punishment resulted in raising a personality type that is less likely to be altruistic, that is less likely to act like Jesus.
That maybe would see empathy as a sin.
Yes. Imagine that. We talked about this in the very first podcast when we came back of the season in August on the authoritarian personality, which is super interesting, and how linked that is to physical punishment as a child. Because when your goal is to force kids to obey you, we shouldn't be surprised if those same people grow up to gravitate towards authoritarian governments.
Yeah, they see goodness as compliance. Like there is no compliance and conformity. And that I mean, it's just so amazing how cyclical that is too, because when you go back and read the early Dobson stuff, it is this real intense fear of social disorder, of civil disobedience, of all of these things. And there is this really high value on compliance and conformity. Even from someone like Chuck Swindoll, who you might not expect, man, that guy was all about authority in his writing, compliance, authority, the orderly household leads to an orderly society. There's this very clear belief in those things being in lockstep with each other. Orderly households equals orderly society.
Yeah. And of course it is patriarchal. It's always presented as, yes, the God, man, woman, children, right?
Yes, and you have more of that in your book than we've talked about in this podcast. But yes, you do talk a lot about that, about how complementarianism really goes hand in hand with this kind of parenting resources. Okay, so as we're wrapping up, I have a question.
Okay.
Were you surprised by the response to Dobson's death? Because what I saw was, I was surprised at the vehemence and just the sheer volume of it, of how upset people were with him.
Yeah, I was not surprised. No, I was not. I mean, I think just the 2-year process of researching for this book and asking people what their experiences were, the countless people who shared their stories with us or just commented on social media or said, this happened to me, or my parent believed this. I was not surprised by it. And I was seeing both, I kind of saw both sides, the defenders and the people who were kind of cheering it. My feeds are very kind of both worlds, which makes it an interesting experience to sort of watch it. And it's been interesting to see people who are a little bit confused by the celebration of his death. But I have to say, I was not surprised. Were you, Marissa?
I think what surprised me, and let me just clarify, was just, I didn't realize how many people attributed their negative childhood to Dobson. I know people were upset at the church in general or at their parents' spanking methods or whatever, but I hadn't realized how much people connected the dots.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the biggest myths that Christian families are served, which is so ironic, painfully so, given everything we've talked about here, is that there's not consequences for the parents or the systems And I think what you see in that conversation, I don't think it's surprising, and I don't think the divide is surprising, because this is what has been happening for the past 10, 20 years with people with abuse response in the church, with people talking about religious trauma, with people raising any concerns whatsoever. There is a parental and systemic incapacity to listen. And instead, there has been an elevating of the people at the top of the hierarchies, like, don't touch them, don't touch them. Like, we cannot honestly reckon a defense of the people who have perpetrated harm. And so I think this is the inevitable response. This is the consequence for people self-platforming themselves to millions of families, and then wanting to step back and say, no, that was user error. If your family experienced a fall, that was on you, because we did it the biblical way. And there can be a plugging, kind of like, I'm not going to listen. Though everyone, crying out their perpetual victims or their progressor or whatever, there will be an othering of the people, as there always is, of survivors of religious abuse, to say they are really the problem. We do not want to hear the children talk back, right? Like, they should be seen and not heard. They failed to obey, and you see this writ large systemically, and it is a brutal reckoning for the church if we could have the courage to face it, because in the same way that this happens in families where parents double down in fragility and defensiveness and won't listen to their children naming harm, like, if we collectively are doing that as a Christian community, there is no way forward into authentic relationship without listening and bearing witness to that. And so I think it's like the bottled up pain of a generation, like how many millions of families were flocking to focus on family. Yes, they implemented it differently. Yes, you will meet people who say, my family was a Dobson family and it didn't cause significant harm. That story's there too. But for those who experience just the gutting, devastating fruit of this and are still picking up the pieces, or are estranged or in pain in their family relationships, I think it's just like this primal howl you're hearing from those people, and often very young places, because it happened so young for so many people. And then you can also see the predictable defenders of the institution. And my theory is many of the people kind of saying, oh, well, Dobson was a friendly voice on the radio in the morning or something, maybe have never read one of his parenting books to begin with, just have never even read it. And so it's this idea of like just defending evangelicalism rather than an honest accounting. So yeah, I think it's understandable, and I think we'll see more of it. I think more and more will just unfold over the coming years.
I think so too. All right, so October 14th, your book is out. Or sorry, Kelsey, do you want to say something else?
No, I was just going to add, because of Dobson's political activism later in his life, I think there's a connection between Dobson and our political moment too in the US that people are also angry about. But that feels like maybe another conversation for another time.
We could talk about.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so Myth of Good Christian Parenting is out October 14th? 14th. Okay.
So eager.
Yes.
And you can get it print and Audible will have it as well.
Yes. And I read an early copy. I endorsed it. I am so grateful that you did this research, that you read through all the crap. I know what it's like to have to read through crap book after crap book. Yep. It is exhausting and demoralizing and depressing. And you wonder what is wrong with Christians and how can I still be a Christian? And then it does the whole faith thing on you. And then you realize, no, wait, I follow Jesus. And so I'm going to come back to him. So yes, it's hard, I know, but thank you for doing that work so that we didn't have to, and other people didn't have to. And you took one for the team. And it's really good. It shows how we got here, and then it offers some hope for where we go from here. So I really appreciate that. It's not, you're not yelling at people who spank either. I know that we've kind of done that a bit on this podcast, but that's not the thrust of your book. You really are making the case well. So it's accessible even for people who might still be in it.
That's what we
Well,
hope for. And yeah, we don't want to heap more shame on people and say, oh, you screwed up parenting, there's some punishment waiting for you, but more an invitation. We'd really love to see some people freed up from this. So thank you so much for this conversation, for having
thank you for reading and for your generous endorsement. We just so appreciate getting to talk with you about this too. There are just so many common threads. And I think people will see that when they read the book, the chapter on complementarianism. There's just a lot of common ground here.
Absolutely. And of course, if you pre-order now, so just go right to your favorite bookseller. Baker Books probably has it at 30% off. They usually do for...
They got a good price, and
yes,
they guarantee release day delivery. So that's good if you want to get it right away.
Yes. So, and so you can get it there. I'll put a link in the podcast notes. And if you order it now, instead of waiting until October 14th, you can also get those free downloads on Spanking, which are awesome. So go check that out. So thank you. And Marissa, Kelsey, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me across social media at Burt Writes on all the platforms.
Yeah. Not same. You can find me on all the platforms. I have a Substack just under my name, Kelsey McGinnis. You can also find a lot of my writing at Christianity Today. I write on music and Christian culture. I have some writing on trad wives and some adjacent subjects there as well. A lot of my content is on Instagram at Kelsey K. McGinnis.
Okay. And I will put those links too so people can find you. All right. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, Keith, I am just so glad that this conversation is happening right now. And it seems like there's a whole bunch of different forces that are converging to make this happen.
To make the evangelical church finally look at the science from the last 40 to 50 years about how there's better ways to discipline your kids than spanking.
Yeah.
And that spanking is harmful.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like, Europe figured this out a long time ago. And the evidence was there in the research. It's been there in the research for a long time, but it was largely a debate. And evangelicals kept saying, well, they're measuring people who spank in anger. They're not measuring people who spank nicely. They're not measuring people who spank when they're not angry. And so in 2000, I think it was 16, it may have been 14, but Elizabeth Gershoff did her huge meta-analysis of 160,000 kids and answered that question finally. And that it doesn't matter whether you're kind when you spank, whether you hug your children at the end, whether you're using an implement or not. Spanking is spanking, and it is either harmful or neutral, but not positive.
Yeah. So the best you can hope for, if you're using spanking as your main form of discipline, is that your kids won't turn out any worse than anybody else.
Yeah. Exactly.
And there's a good chance that you may hurt them, psychologically as well as physically. Like psychologically, there's a lot of bad things that can come out of it as well too. Yeah. So it's either neutral or it's bad. It's never good.
Right. Which means that if you were spanked and you're like, well, I did fine.
Yeah.
My parents were great with me. Just please realize that you did fine despite the spanking, not because of it.
Yeah.
And that's an important distinction. And I'm not saying that to shame people who did spank, because honestly, maybe not for our generation of parents, but the people who were 10 years older and older than that, I think among our peers, there were people who didn't spank, but in our parents' generation, almost everybody did. And so we're not trying to shame people. It's just, don't you want better?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's like Maya Angelou says, right? When you know better, you do better, right? So maybe you grew up listening to all these teachers telling you, if you don't spank your kids, bad things will happen, because that's what a lot of Christian resources said. But we know better now. We need to do better. And if you did that and your kids are grown up now and you think, maybe I shouldn't have done that, maybe you call them and say, it's the best I knew at the time, but I'm sorry. I wish I'd known then what I know now. Because I think a lot of kids would value that. A lot of adult children who went through that would value that. Hearing that and having that put to words might be helpful in bridging some gaps.
Yeah, because none of us want generational trauma to continue. We all want to see it broken. And so let's just do that. There's better ways, and we can find that out. So take a look at The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. I will also put some links to some of our articles on spanking and the research around spanking. And of course, if you pre-order the book, you can get their downloads too on Christian spanking. So really helpful. So glad they wrote this book. And thank you for listening in. And we will see you again next week on the Bare Marriage Podcast. Bye-bye.